Hello everyone out there in YouTube land. I am the Scent Maven and welcome back to my channel, Shopping and Scents. So today I have another non-shopping or scent related video to share with you. So there is a movie that's going to be coming out around Thanksgiving and I'm really excited to see it. And the reason that I'm filming this now is because the trailer for the movie, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, starring Tom Hanks, came out this week, the trailer, not the movie, and it was a trending video on YouTube. And I didn't even know that this movie, I didn't know anything about this movie until I saw it was trending. And I was like, I wonder what that is. And it's sort of a biopic of Mr. Rogers. So if you are a kid that grew up anywhere from the 1960s through to the 1990s, then you probably watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood on PBS, as I did. It was on other channels before PBS. It was on a station in Pittsburgh, and then it came to PBS. So anyway, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Go check out the trailer. I'm gonna fix my eyes here. Go check out the trailer if you haven't seen it already. I saw it once, saw the trailer one time, and I was so excited to see this movie. I'm a big fan of biopics in general. I'm a big fan of Tom Hanks. I think he's a great actor and he was a good choice for this role. Does he look like Fred Rogers? Yes and no. I mean, once they did the makeup, the hair, and they put him in the sweater and the tennis shoes, yeah, he kind of looks like Fred Rogers. But as some people have pointed out, Tom Hanks is a bigger guy than Fred Rogers was, sort of in stature. So what I mean is, like, he was a larger framed person, not fat, just a larger frame. Mr. Rogers was 143 pounds. And I will talk more about how I know that from a documentary that just came out recently. So yeah, Mr. Rogers was slim. He was tiny. And Tom Hanks is just a bigger framed guy. I didn't even notice that until some other YouTube reviewers had brought that up. The thing that gets me, that nobody seems to mention, is that Tom Hanks, I don't think, does 100% dead-on imitation of Fred Rogers' voice. He sounds like he's doing Forrest Gump. It has this kind of southern twang to it, just a teensy bit. And Mr. Rogers was from Pittsburgh, so he didn't have a southern accent. He had more of like a Ned Flanders type accent. If you hear snoring in the background, that is my pug who was passed out in the living room and has to always interrupt my videos. Malcolm, hey, stop snoring. So anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so Tom Hanks kind of sounds like Forrest Gump. If you watch the trailer, I kept expecting him to say, Lieutenant Dan, you know, like, it's terrible, but he sounds like Forrest Gump. So yeah, I'm really excited to see that movie. And if you can't wait to see it and you want to see another, or, well, I don't know if that's going to be a good movie. I'm assuming it's going to be a good movie. But if you want to see another good movie, check out a documentary that was released a couple of months ago, I believe. It is for purchase on YouTube. I'm not, not sponsored. But it's called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And it is a documentary on Fred Rogers. And a lot of YouTubers have reviewed it. It's an excellent documentary. It's gotten great reviews. And it talks all about, all kinds of things that maybe you didn't know about Fred Rogers. Like, he was an ordained minister and he was a vegetarian. And he only weighed 143 pounds from the time he was in high school / college, I think, till the time he passed on. And the number 143 was significant to him because, not because he was heavy as a little kid. He was a little chunky as a little kid, they said in the documentary, but because 143 were the numbers of I love you. Like I is 1 letter, love is 4 letters, and you is 3 letters. And so he put 143 and I love you together. It talks about how, the documentary talks about how Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was a revolutionary show for its time, how it dealt with topics like race and death and divorce, and even the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. So it was just wonderful to see all the stuff that you don't really notice as a kid. And then when you're watching it as an adult, you're like, wow, Mr. Rogers really talked about all those things. And he did. And he did a bunch of other stuff, like when President Nixon was going to cut funding to PBS, he spoke before Congress and he gave such an impassioned speech. You can watch it on YouTube, that the funding was restored to PBS, $20 million. And there were other things that he did, like he had an actor on his show who was a singer, but he became an actor on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and his name was Francois Clemens, and he was an African-American man. And at that time, early on in the show, segregation was still an issue. Racism still is today, but racism was an issue, even more so back then. And there are scenes where they talk about how there was an incident at a hotel, I believe, where the management did not want African-American people and Caucasian people to be in the same swimming pool. And the manager or whoever came out and started pouring, not Clorox, but whatever chemical into the pool to drive the people out of the pool. And so on an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, he invites Francois Clemens, who plays Officer Clemens, I think they used his real name. He plays a police officer on the show, invites him to cool his feet off on a hot summer's day by putting them in a kid's swimming pool. And Fred Rogers has his feet in the swimming pool, and Francois Clemens puts his feet in the swimming pool, and they use the little hose on their feet and everything. And it was symbolic. It was a small, could have been construed as a small thing, but it was really symbolic for 2 reasons. One, because of the whole racism, swimming pool segregation thing. And also it had religious meaning. They were saying, I don't think they said this in the documentary, but I've seen it in other footage, that it may have been an ode to the apostles washing Jesus's feet, or Jesus washing the apostles' feet. I'm not super religious. You have to go check back on that. So yeah, and the documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, it's not only is it really moving and touching, but and I've heard people say this before about it, it's not if you will cry while watching it, it's how many times you will cry and when. Because it's just that dramatic. And, there are even things in there about how Mr. Rogers felt about being parodied. There were some parodies that he was okay with. Like, I was surprised that they seemed to imply that he was okay with Eddie Murphy's portrayal of him on SNL when he did Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood. And Eddie Murphy would show Mr. Robinson in a more urban area than Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And he would answer the door by saying, "This is how we answer the door in my neighborhood. Who is it?" Like it was funny. And I think, and Mr. Rogers had said that, either he said this or I read it or heard it somewhere, that it didn't bother him because it was on TV late at night when children wouldn't be watching it, and it was just adults watching it, so they would kind of be in on the joke and understand it. Yeah, so there's that. But there were other parodies that were really mean, and I think that the ones that he referred to one not in the documentary, but when there's footage of him on the David Letterman show where he talks about someone, a radio personality, he doesn't say who, that was on at the time that pretended to be Mr. Rogers, that imitated his voice and advocated that children should use lighters and hairspray together or something dangerous and ridiculous like that. And the person thought that everybody knew that it wasn't really Mr. Rogers, and the real Mr. Rogers thought it was a terrible parody, and I think it's terrible too. But there's also one on In Living Color where Jim Carrey does just a really mean parody of Mr. Rogers, where he plays him as a pervert in a Blockbuster video store, renting porno and groping female customers, and it's just awful. And you know, I like Jim Carrey and I like In Living Color, but that was just terrible. And at the end, Jim Carrey, as Mr. Rogers, imitation, whatever, goes outside and tries to pick up a hooker. And the hooker says, "Aren't you Mr. Rogers?" And then Jim Carrey drops the Mr. Rogers voice and he says, "No, of course not, you know, but you could still be my neighbor," or something like that. "Oh no, but the money's real." He's like, "No, I'm not the real Mr. Rogers, but the money's real." And there were comments on that parody on YouTube in the comments that said, the reason that Jim Carrey in Living Color had to say, "Of course I'm not the real Mr. Rogers," at the end in the skit is so that they wouldn't get sued. But I don't know if that's really true, because you can parody a public figure without it being slanderous or libelous. I don't think. It's really tough to prove libel and slander against a public figure. But anyway, maybe they did it just to play it safe. Maybe that was just some people's opinions. So, yeah. And the other interesting things about the documentary are that they show that Fred Rogers was really the same type of person on screen as he was off. And I think that today, a lot of people expect that someone who appears as good and kind and gentle as Mr. Rogers would have some sort of dark side, that they couldn't all be, you know, just wonderful and just a good-hearted person, that he must have gotten angry. He must have, you know, maybe had a drinking problem. He must have had some vice or something in his past, you know. And then we think about the whole Bill Cosby situation and, you know, how awful that is. And, you know, did Mr. Rogers have a dark side? And really everyone that they interviewed said he was the same man on screen as he was off. And he did get angry, but he didn't really get angry he didn't express his anger in a traditional way, like by shouting or cursing. You know, he said that he would play the piano in a harsh way, like, you know, low tones, dark tones, and things of that nature. And they even had bloopers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood that I've seen. They showed it on David Letterman and stuff, where one instance, he's trying to put up a tent and things are just not going right, and he's falling over the tent, and it's a total disaster. And eventually he just throws the tent, but he doesn't, you know, curse or gives a finger or do anything like that. And there was another, you know, part of it where the guys on the set, the people on the set would make, you know, not make jokes, but play jokes, practical jokes on him. Like, you know, he changes his shoes. The whole thing of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, if you've never seen it, which I can't imagine anyone who's never seen it, but maybe if you're in a different country or whatever, the whole episode, every episode pretty much starts off the same way. He enters his home and he sings "It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood," and he wrote all the music and did all the puppetry and all that kind of stuff on the show, and he had a degree in music, and that's something they talk about. So he walks into his house and he sings "Won't You Be My Neighbor," and then he takes off his sport jacket and he puts on a sweater to show that it's like, you know, time to be casual, and he takes off his dress shoes and he puts on tennis shoes. And so at the end of the show, he does the opposite. He puts the business shoes back on and the sport coat back on. So anyway, somebody on the set put smaller shoes, so he couldn't fit his feet into them. And he didn't get mad. He just laughed it off. And there was another thing that I thought he would totally be upset by, that I couldn't believe somebody on the set did this to him. So apparently one day, Fred Rogers brought his camera, like a point and shoot camera, to the set, and he was taking pictures. And one of the set members took a picture, one of the staffers took a picture of his bare behind and then put the camera back. And he said for months and months, Fred Rogers never said anything about the butt picture. And then one day around Christmas time, he's like, you know, the guy was talking to the other people, you know, I wonder how come, you know, Fred hasn't said anything about that butt picture. And they said to him, have you seen your Christmas gift? And Fred Rogers had blown up to poster size the picture that this guy had took. It was him wearing the King Friday the 13th, which is one of the puppets, mask, and turning, and he's got his pants pulled under his butt, and it's a hysterical photo. It's it's ridiculous, and apparently even that didn't get Mr. Rogers very mad. So it was a touching documentary. I know I'm not doing it justice by talking about it randomly here and there, but I wanted to do some more content for my channel, and really seeing that trailer for A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood inspired me to really learn more about Mr. Rogers and the type of person that he was, and about his legacy and all the interesting things and amazing things that he did during his lifetime. And they also asked the question, you know, what would he do if he were alive today? Would the current state of the world just be so terrible that he wouldn't even try to make it a better place? And they answer that question. So if you're interested, I highly recommend that you watch the documentary Won't You Be My Neighbor, and check out the trailer for the upcoming movie A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And leave a comment down below. What do you think? If you've seen the documentary, what do you think about it? If you're looking forward to seeing the upcoming Tom Hanks take on it, let me know that too. If you think he sounds like Forrest Gump in the trailer, somebody say something, because am I the only one who hears it? And I think that's going to be it. So remember to comment, rate, subscribe. You guys are all my neighbors, my YouTube neighbors. Hit the little bell for notifications, and I will see you in another video. Goodbye, everyone out there in YouTube land.